I say to Donnie, do you want to ride back to the garage area? There was a crowd gathering, all those kind of things. And with that, Kale starts hollering at me, that I caused the wreck. And as I'm trying to say something to Donnie, Kale hits me in the face with his helmet.
The cameras had barely stopped shaking when the entire country saw it. Two battered cars sat in the infield grass at Daytona in 1979, steam rising, tempers boiling, and millions of Americans watching a live fistfight that changed NASCAR forever. Cale Yarborough was swinging, Donnie Allison was swinging back, and then Bobby Allison arrived. No hesitation, no fear, no calculation. He stepped out of his car and walked straight into the brawl. He did it because loyalty mattered. He did it because old-school racers never backed down. And he did it because Bobby Allison carried a fire that few men in this sport could ever understand. That moment did more than shock a nation. It revealed something raw about Bobby. Behind the trophies, behind the championships, behind the reputation as a member of the Alabama gang, there was a man who held grudges with the same intensity he held a steering wheel. If you crossed him, you remembered it. If you disrespected him, he stored it. And if you tried to take food off his family's table, he would meet you on the track and settle it at 200 miles per hour. For decades, he raced with scars that never healed. Some were from wrecks. Some were from heartbreak. But some were from men he believed had wronged him. Men who pushed him, fought him, slammed him, and sometimes tried to run him out of the sport. These were not simple disagreements. These were rivalries built on real contact, real anger, and real consequences. In a garage full of giants, Bobby Allison never forgot who drew blood first. Now, at 87, with the engines silent and the years stacked behind him, he can finally say the quiet part out loud. The names he truly could not stand. The drivers who made his blood boil long before the green flag ever dropped. And the rivalries that shaped one of the toughest careers the sport has ever seen. Before we move into the list, we need to remember who Bobby Allison truly is. Bobby Allison was born in 1937 in Miami, Florida, long before NASCAR became a national spectacle. He grew up in a working family that understood effort, sacrifice, and the value of every dollar earned. Racing was not a glamorous dream. It was a way out, a way forward, a way to prove himself in a world where toughness mattered more than talk. As a young man, he chased every opportunity he could find, driving on short tracks across the South, sleeping in cramped motel rooms, and fixing his own cars because nobody else would. When he eventually settled in Hueytown, Alabama, he formed the foundation of what would become the Alabama Gang. Alongside Donnie Allison and Red Farmer, he built a culture of hard driving and harder fighting. They were the kind of racers who never asked for permission. They showed up, pushed the limit, and made the sport pay attention. Bobby earned respect not by smiling for cameras, but by outrunning and outlasting men with deeper pockets and bigger teams. His career numbers tell one story. More than 80 wins, 2 Daytona 500s, and a Cup Series championship. But the scars tell another. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Bobby Allison carried the weight of fierce rivalries, bitter crashes, and unforgettable confrontations. His style was aggressive but precise. He was willing to make contact, but he never saw himself as reckless. In his mind, he raced the way the sport was meant to be raced, with pride and with backbone. The 1988 crash at Pocono nearly ended his life, and did end his full-time career. Even then, Bobby refused to fade. His place in NASCAR history was already locked in. He was a man shaped by risk, strengthened by pain, and defined by the battles he survived. To understand the drivers he could not stand, you must understand the man himself. Bobby Allison lived through an era where rivals were not handled with quotes or press releases. They were handled on the track, and the men who crossed him paid for it at full speed. Number 5. Darrell Waltrip. The tension between Bobby Allison and Darrell Waltrip began long before their fenders ever touched. Waltrip entered NASCAR with confidence that bordered on provocation. He spoke freely, he challenged veterans in interviews, and he branded himself as the new face of the sport. To a man like Bobby Allison, who had clawed his way up from short tracks and lived through years when racing barely paid the bills, the talking felt cheap. Bobby believed respect was earned through sweat, broken knuckles, and long nights in the garage, not through quotes on television. Waltrip represented a wave of drivers who treated NASCAR like entertainment. Bobby treated it like survival. Their rivalry escalated as victories stacked up. Bristol became one of their most heated battlegrounds, a place where both men refused to lift, and contact was almost guaranteed. Bobby remembered every time Waltrip pushed the line too far. Daytona added another chapter, when Bobby felt Waltrip pinched him hard in Turn 3 during a qualifying race. Richmond added even more bitterness, when close racing turned into another incident that left Bobby furious at what he saw as reckless confidence. Waltrip brushed each moment aside, calling them part of racing. To Bobby, those words felt like a smirk. Off the track, their personalities clashed just as intensely. Waltrip enjoyed cameras, commentary, and attention. Bobby operated with a colder edge. He did not care about headlines. He cared about the scoreboard. Crew members told stories about heated hallway confrontations. Officials remembered meetings filled with tension, thick enough to stop conversations. While some drivers separated competition from personal feelings, Bobby kept a long memory. He remembered tone, he remembered intent, and he remembered patterns. Over time, Waltrip became a symbol to Bobby. Not just a rival, but a representation of something shifting inside NASCAR. The sport was changing. Younger drivers were promoting themselves, talking bigger, acting bigger, moving the spotlight from grit to personality. Bobby did not hate change itself. He hated the feeling that the values he built his life on were being replaced by noise and theatrics. And Waltrip, by accident or design, stood in the center of that shift. Their rivalry did not rely on wrecks or explosive fights. It lived in the way they eyed each other on race mornings, the way they fought for inches when they met on track, and the way neither man ever softened his opinion of the other. Some grudges fade over time. This one never did. Bobby Allison did not fear men who talked. He only remembered the ones who talked and hit back. Number 4, David Pearson. Bobby Allison respected skill, but respect did not erase friction. His relationship with David Pearson was built on sharp contrasts. Pearson was smooth, calculated, and impossibly patient. He waited for mistakes, studied tendencies, and struck with the precision of a surgeon. Bobby was different. He raced with force, instinct, and a willingness to take space even when the gap barely existed. Two philosophies collided, and neither man ever moved far enough to avoid the sparks. Their rivalry grew strongest at places that punished hesitation. Darlington was one of them. High speeds, narrow lines, and a track surface that showed no mercy. Both men fought for the same territory, the same air, the same inch that could change a race. One afternoon at Darlington, Bobby felt Pearson crowded him tighter than the situation demanded. Pearson said it was clean. Bobby disagreed. The frustration lingered long after the checkered flag. Talladega magnified the tension. Drafting battles turned into psychological warfare, and Pearson excelled at it. He knew how to break rhythm, how to trap a competitor, how to make a driver feel like every move would fall into a waiting net. Bobby hated that feeling. He believed racing should be decided by courage and control, not by a man playing chess at 200 miles per hour. Pearson, with his quiet confidence, forced Bobby to confront a style he never trusted. In garage areas across the South, stories circulated about these two. They rarely shouted in public, but the gap between them was obvious. Bobby never accused Pearson of being weak. He accused him of being too calculated, too willing to let others make the first move, too focused on the mental game. To Bobby, that crossed a line. He did not mind hard racing. He minded racing that felt like a trap. The media often framed their rivalry as a battle between intelligence and aggression. Inside Bobby's world, it was simpler. Pearson was a man who used pressure like a weapon. Bobby felt every ounce of it. He remembered races where Pearson shadowed him, waiting for a single crack. He remembered how the quiet ones sometimes caused the deepest cuts. They were both legends, both champions, both forces of nature. But Bobby Allison never forgot the driver who made every race feel like a hunt. Number 3, Richard Petty. For many fans, Bobby Allison and Richard Petty were the two pillars of an era. But pillars can collide, and when they did, the shock carried through every corner of American motorsports. Their rivalry was built on more than speed. It was built on dominance, Two men fighting not only for wins but for identity in a sport that had room for only one king at a time. Bobby entered NASCAR with a chip on his shoulder. Richard Petty entered with a dynasty behind him. While Petty enjoyed the weight of a powerhouse team, Bobby clawed his way forward, with smaller operations and a relentless will. That imbalance formed the foundation of their tension. Bobby never saw Petty as a villain. He saw him as the obstacle that stood between him and everything he had worked for. Their on-track clashes were frequent and unforgettable. Daytona turned into a theater of power, where Bobby felt Petty pushed him high on the exit of Turn 4 during a heated duel. Talladega added more bitterness when Petty's crew protested a finish that Bobby believed he had earned without question. At short tracks like North Wilkesboro and Martinsville, their fenders traded paint with a level of intensity that made the grandstands shake. Respect existed, but respect did not soften the blows. Each man carried his own following. Petty had the blue crowds, the families, the people who believed in tradition. Bobby had the working class, the fighters, the fans who saw in him a reflection of themselves. When they met on track, the sport felt divided into two camps, and that division fed the rivalry. Every pass felt like a statement. Every block felt like a message. Every win felt like a wound to the other side. Off the track, their interactions were civil but never warm. They were professionals, not friends. They shook hands when required, but their eyes never agreed. Bobby believed Petty received advantages that others never did. Petty believed Bobby pushed limits farther than the rulebook intended. Neither opinion ever fully faded. Time softened the edges of many rivalries, but not this one. Bobby never dismissed Petty's greatness. He simply never forgot the battles it took to survive him. Some men earn your respect. Others force you to fight for it until the last lap. Number 2. Cale Yarborough. The rivalry between Bobby Allison and Cale Yarborough was never subtle. It lived in plain sight, loud enough for grandstands to feel and sharp enough for officials to fear. Both men raced with force. Both carried tempers that never cooled. And both believed the other had crossed lines that could not be uncrossed. What began as competitive tension eventually became one of the most explosive relationships in NASCAR history. Their clashes in the early 1970s set the tone. At tracks like Martinsville and Rockingham, Bobby felt Yarborough forced the issue, with late dives that bordered on reckless. Yarborough in return saw Bobby as a man who pushed harder than the situation required. Two drivers built from fire, fighting for the same ground at the same moment, always 1 inch from disaster. That inch disappeared more than once, and each time it did, the memory stayed. Talladega amplified everything. High-speed packs turned their rivalry into something unpredictable. Bobby believed Yarborough used the draft like a weapon, trapping him with no room to escape. Yarborough claimed he simply raced to win. Neither explanation satisfied the other. The tension grew race by race, contact by contact. And with every incident, the distance between them shrank until conflict felt inevitable. Then came 1979, the Daytona 500. The moment that froze their rivalry in American memory. Allison and Yarborough collided first, but Bobby arrived seconds later. When he stepped out of his car and walked toward the crash site, he was not just a teammate defending family. He was a man confronting years of frustration, anger, and unfinished business. The fist that followed became the first nationwide glimpse of the storm that had been building between Bobby and Yarborough. It was raw, violent, and impossible to ignore. Even after the cameras stopped rolling, the bitterness lingered. They raced with the awareness that any mistake could ignite another fire. Crew members dreaded seeing their haulers parked near each other. Spotters raised their voices when the two cars lined up side by side. Fans picked sides that hardened into loyalty. The rivalry did not fade with time. It simply shifted into the background, becoming part of who each man was. Bobby Allison never forgot the driver who met him head-on without a second thought. Number 1. Dale Earnhardt. The rivalry between Bobby Allison and Dale Earnhardt carried a different kind of weight. It was not built on words or theatrics. It was built on impact, on moments when metal-bent tempers rose and neither man stepped aside. Earnhardt was younger, hungrier, and willing to take space even when it barely existed. Bobby, already hardened by years of battles, saw in Earnhardt a reflection of the danger he had spent a lifetime confronting. And that reflection came with sparks. Their first clashes were subtle. Earnhardt's aggressive style was obvious from the start. He moved drivers without apology, and he did it to Bobby more than once. Pocono delivered one of the early warnings. Bobby felt Earnhardt chopped across him with no margin for error. Earnhardt insisted it was part of winning. Bobby stored the moment. Richmond added more fuel. Another close fight, another hit, another day where Bobby believed Earnhardt pushed beyond reason. Bristol turned tension into a steady burn, especially when both men fought for inside lines that neither intended to surrender. Bobby believed Earnhardt treated racing like combat. Earnhardt believed Bobby had ruled the sport long enough. Two worlds collided, and each saw the other as a threat to everything he valued. Bobby came from a generation where respect was earned through courtesy as much as toughness. Earnhardt came from a world where you took what you wanted and dealt with the consequences later. Their differences were more than style. They were philosophy. Garage areas felt the shift whenever they parked near each other. Crew members watched with a level of caution rarely seen. Spotters raised their voices when the two cars lined up side by side. Reporters quietly circled them, waiting for a word, a stare, a sign of the storm beneath the surface. And yet there were no theatrics. No shouting matches. No public blow-ups. The rivalry lived deeper than that. It lived in the way neither man trusted the other when the race tightened and the laps disappeared. Earnhardt earned his legacy through relentless pressure. Bobby respected the talent but despised the method. He believed Earnhardt crossed lines that should never be crossed, lines built on decades of unwritten rules that kept drivers alive. Earnhardt, on the other hand, saw Bobby as part of a system he intended to tear down. They fought for track position, for identity, for control of an era that was shifting beneath their wheels. Some rivals test your patience. Others test your survival. The rivalry between Bobby Allison and Junior Johnson was different from the others. It did not come from door-to-door battles or last-lap collisions. It came from something deeper: power, influence, control. Junior Johnson was not just another competitor. He was a force inside the sport, a man whose teams shaped championships and whose decisions shaped careers. Bobby Allison respected talent, but he never trusted power that operated behind the wall instead of on the track. Their tension sharpened during the years when Junior Johnson fielded cars for Darrell Waltrip. Bobby believed Waltrip received advantages that came from relationships, not merit. He believed Johnson's operation enjoyed a comfort that others had to fight twice as hard to earn. While Johnson saw himself as a man building a winning machine, Bobby saw a gatekeeper whose decisions tilted the balance of the sport. And once Bobby felt the scale was uneven, the resentment rooted itself. In closed meetings, whispers circulated about disagreements over rules, interpretation, inspections, and team treatment. Bobby felt Johnson pushed officials in ways smaller teams never could. Johnson felt Bobby blamed politics for problems that were simply performance. The truth lived somewhere in the middle, but the divide grew wide enough that neither man cared to bridge it. Their conversations rarely ended with agreement. Most ended with each man more convinced of his own perspective. The rivalry intensified whenever Bobby raced against a Johnson car. Every pass carried weight. Every block carried suspicion. If Bobby won, he felt he earned it against a system that favored others. If he lost, he questioned how much of the defeat belonged to the track and how much belonged to influence. It was not jealousy. It was suspicion born from a career spent clawing for every inch without a safety net. For Bobby, Johnson represented a type of rival he despised more than any driver. A man whose greatest strength lived off the track. Bobby had spent his life fighting visible battles. Johnson fought his where the public could not see. That difference created a tension that never softened with time, even as the two men aged and the sport moved forward. This rivalry did not explode like Daytona '79. It did not create headlines. It formed quietly, one decision at a time, until Bobby Allison no longer believed they lived in the same version of NASCAR. Some opponents hit you with a bumper. Others hit you with everything you cannot see. Time has a way of sanding down the rough edges of most rivalries. But Bobby Allison never lived a life shaped by soft memories. His story was built in fire and noise, in nights spent rebuilding wrecked cars just to race again the next morning. Every man he clashed with left a mark, not because he held a grudge without cause, but because each rivalry came from something real. Contact, pressure, survival. No one in his world earned a second thought without earning the first one on the track. Now, at 87 with the engines quiet and the grandstands far away, Bobby's reflections carry a weight that only time can create. He does not rewrite history. He does not hide the truth. He remembers the moments when pride was on the line, when inches meant everything, and when another driver's name meant more than just a number on a scoring pylon. These were the men who forced him to push harder, drive sharper, and accept the consequences of racing with no fear. The sport has changed. The rules have changed. The personalities have changed. But Bobby Allison's world was built in an era where grudges were handled at full speed, where respect came from scars, and where your rivals shaped you as much as your victories. The 5 drivers he could not stand were not just opponents. They were the mirror he fought against, the challenge he never walked away from, and the proof of what it took to survive the golden age of NASCAR. Some legends are remembered for their wins. Bobby Allison is remembered for the men he refused to bow to.